Hey up, I got a good question in the comments every day. I get many good questions, but this is the one we're going to speak into today. You speak about, it was something along the lines of, you speak about trauma a lot, therefore clearly you're traumatised, or I see myself as traumatised, and I speak about healing my trauma a lot, so that would be an understandable perception. So it's something like, you speak about trauma a lot, can you tell us what your trauma is? Sure. I shall speak into my trauma as a human experience through my flesh body and my mind. But first I want to speak into it a bit more broadly when it's quieter. So the first thing to note about trauma, there's many levels to it, so let's speak into it as most people understand it on a human level. Something happens to you, often as a child, it's traumatic and it affects how you act as an adult. It's what we call the ego is created, which is like a safety officer, and it's based on past experiences, and it tries to avoid those past experiences. But often those decisions are coming from that traumatized part. So it could be like a 3-year-old part of you that's making those decisions. Many people, when we're discussing this sort of trauma, they go straight to, like, you know, rape or, you know, parents getting divorced, you know, like fairly big events, and that's what trauma is. But actually, trauma to a small baby, a small child, can be the most subtle, insignificant thing, often energetic. But then there's the other levels to it. So what about the fact that everything we've ever been told is a lie? What, you know, that's heavily traumatic. Starting the journey of observing without emotion that everything, without getting emotional about it. You know, this is why people don't do it. Like, people will avoid the truth because it invokes emotions. But if one can get to a stage where they can just objectively assess the truth that everything they've ever been told is a lie, then they can start to unravel that trauma, because that is a trauma. I mean, just think about it, the schooling system, heavily traumatic. Like, not only are you being conditioned into being a little slave that puts their hand up to speak to authority, and authority tells you what the answer is, you're also being lied to, you're also potentially being bullied, you've got all the social stuff going on. Life is very traumatic. So on a human level, trauma exists, and that can be anything from going to school, your parents telling you to shut up, getting raped, you know, it's the whole spectrum. And then there's also the conscious human journey of realizing that everything you've ever been told is a lie, and the trauma in that is giving up the status of whatever you've learned, the knowledge or whatever job you've acquired. For example, imagine if you're a doctor. The status that you're given by others, you know, to give that up and accept that's all based on lies, and actually you're part of a horrendous system. You know, this is very traumatic. Then you've got the next level, which is the one that I'm sort of working in now, mainly. I mean, there's still reminiscence of my human trauma, which I'll talk about shortly, going on. But really, it's a trauma of being a self, of the separation from God, of the separation from consciousness. You know, we're all born into this world as a baby with that connection, with that feeling, that knowing that we are part of something much bigger, and that gets conditioned out of us through our upbringing, through schooling, just through, we are conditioned to believe we are ourselves. So that is the ultimate trauma, that separation, that belief that Tom Greater X exists, that this character is separate from these characters, is separate from the bikes, from the cars, from all we see around us. That's the ultimate trauma. Now for me, I'm using the word trauma because that's what was in the question, and it's a word that people understand. I don't really see it as trauma anymore. I still experience the trauma of it, the anxiety that comes with feeling like a self, the desire to control one's existence as if you exist. You know, yes, that does come up, but for me now it's just more of a challenge, a deepening, a journey, you know, there's a lot of joy in it, and it's, you know, it's also very challenging. But basically it's just a leaning in. It's a like taking the path of highest resistance, leaning into fear. I'm kind of past. I've done 10 years of intense shadow work, like dedicated my life to healing and understanding myself through psychology. So I'm kind of through the really grudgy bits, you know, the bits where you are just, you know, what people call the ego death. And I'm sure there's more, but I mean in like a material sense, in a like not wanting to let go of being a businessman, or losing this business, or the money, or whatever. You know, or loneliness, or the fantasy of being in a relationship, the thought of needing another to be complete, all this sort of thing. Like, I've done that, and yes, there's still reminiscences of it, and yes, I can still fall into it in moments, but I'm so aware of it, and it's just a further transmuting. You know, healing is like a spiral. You know, you'll work on something like love addiction here, and you'll be like, oh, I've cracked it, and then you'll come back round, and you'll be back in it, and you'll be like, what? I thought I dealt with this. But you're removing a deeper layer of it. You know, you're feeling a deeper emotion that you've had suppressed around it. Of course, the personality of this fake character, Tom Greatorex, is still affected by what happened to him as a child, but not so much. You know, I'm way beyond living in the minds of others, which is a massive one for so many people. Like, you know, to be able to just share what you think authentically. Like, YouTube has been a massive journey for me with this. Obviously, when I first started, I was a bit scared, and you know, you want to show this sort of polished image, the narcissistic mask that we all wear. Oh, will you like me if I show up with just these parts, but I'll hide all of this, the shadow. You know, that's how we live life. And in my general life, I've been living very authentically for a long time. But to put it all online, and that's the ultimate mirror, getting received back, you know you're going to get lots of judgments from people who aren't ready to lean into these concepts, aren't ready to accept these truths, and therefore need to project onto them and project onto you. You know, that's been a huge journey of working the muscle of authenticity. You know, it still comes up for me now, like I'll share as I do, and then I'll have a few joints and I'll be like, oh my god, I posted that today, ugh. But it's so short-lived, you know. I'm just like, okay, what part of you is scared? You know, I know exactly how to process it. But that's an example. The reason I share that is because that's how you heal trauma. It's constantly leaning into a more authentic part of you, which is essentially leaning into the fears, leaning into whatever's holding you back, leaning into knowing what you want to do, but you're like, oh, but then my mum will think this, or this person will think this, or I might lose my job. You know, and obviously that's a very practical one. I might lose my job, but then why are you in that job? You know, why haven't you created your own destiny? You know, why are you in a job at all? That's trauma. You know, working for another, not having enough belief in self to create something for self. You know, I've been a businessman since I was 14, with various successes, various failures. You know, that's just in me, and I do think being an entrepreneur is kind of a start to awakening. If you're not working for self, or creating for self, or at least living to a purpose, a sole purpose, whilst having a job as well, then you haven't even begun. And one last point before I get into what my trauma as a human is. You know, I see comments from people saying I've never been depressed, or there was one recently saying, have you ever just been content with life? And I've had other conversations with women, like, I know she's not leaning in, she's, you know, living a very normie kind of life. And that just, you know, in one way I'm just like, what? But you know, I know what it is, I understand it. Like, this is complete unconsciousness, to a point where you're deluded and living in such a lie that you feel satisfied with that lie. You know, like if I asked my parents if they're happy, they'd say yes. Yeah, you know, I don't want to speak about them too much, but you know, they're clearly not. There's many signs, but they're not. I mean, yeah, anyway, we'll move on from that, but you know what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, people who claim to have never been depressed or content whilst they still experience themselves as a self, you know, they haven't even begun, they haven't even started the journey, they haven't even had a conscious thought. Like, they're just so numb and unaware to all the possibilities, that they're living such a small existence that they can tell themselves they're content. But yeah, it's a very, and I don't even mean this as a criticism, it's just a reality. It's a very immature soul. You know, it's a soul that hasn't been here many times before and is still like, oh wow, look at this, oh I can drink this, oh I can do this, you know, I can watch this. You know, it hasn't even begun its evolution journey, and that's fine, you know. It's not about better or worse or anything like that, it's just, this is the reality. Alright, so what the question was actually about was wanting to know all the dastardly awful things that would have happened to me as a child. So my parents are, you know, as far as unconscious society goes, as far as being brought up in a very brainwashed way, they're as good as it gets. They're the most typical middle class upbringing you could imagine, with a really loving, doting mother, but a very detached father, particularly in younger years. Dissociated, he's completely dissociated. To give you an example, they have a dog, and it's quite a needy dog, quite a whimpery dog, likes attention, and it will come up to my dad for attention, i.e. a pat on its head, and my dad has two possible categories that it could possibly be. Does it need a shit? Does it need feeding? And once he assesses, well, I let it out half an hour ago and it's not feeding time, there's no other option as far as he's concerned, until my mum goes, she wants a pat, and he goes, oh right, and like touches it 3 times, gives it no love whatsoever. And you know, he's a really good man, I'm not knocking him. His mum got TB when he was born. He didn't see her for the first 2 years. His dad was away in the war. You know, it's very obvious why he can't show love, certainly to something small or something he doesn't understand. And I see the way he speaks to children, you know, like it's the same. So I remember as a child feeling like my dad wasn't interested, but then I also remember, I mean, I didn't really know that because it's all I knew, it was just normal. But then I remember making friends with a kid next door who was a bit younger than me, and seeing his dad and just being like, wow, like his dad was so playing with him and playing computer games with him, and like was a mate, and I was just like baffled by it. So that was the first time I sort of had some sort of awareness around it. And then I remember when I got to 13, 14, suddenly feeling like my dad was interested, and basically that's because he could start to relate. He couldn't do it with a child, he can't do it with a dog, but he can do it with an adult, obviously on a very unconscious level, but he can do it. So that was, and then when the first time I drank ayahuasca, a lot came up, but I remember one of the main things was it showed me how contorted my body was, how contorted it was. It was this. And it showed me that this energetic contortion in me was what was creating my obsession with money. I was like quite a successful businessman at this point, and I was ruthless, you know, I was a real nasty boss and all that, you know, all about the money over like staff welfare. And it showed me that's because I had this contorted energy, like this grabby energy, like, and then it showed me like, it was like, Daddy, give me attention, give me attention. And it was this trauma as a child that had made me so megalomaniac, so all about the money, this mad businessman that would, I wasn't like, I'd walk over people to get what I want. You know, I wouldn't do someone wrong. I've never been into doing people over or anything like that. But I mean, like, as in the way I would have seen it then, like that would have meant like, you know, lying to someone to get money out of them, or not paying someone, or what you said you'd pay, or something like that. But I certainly did it in the ways of making staff work way too hard, not having enough staff, not making sure the facilities were clean for them, not speaking to them right, all that sort of thing. And then when I've been doing a lot of inner child work, shadow work, what has come up quite often is when I was conceived, my mum was convinced I was a girl, like just convinced, there was no question in her mind, and she wanted a girl. And when I came out, when I was born, her first words, I'd like to tell you all that the nurse's first words were, ooh, he's well endowed. But on a more not so great level, my mum's first words were, I'm so disappointed. Now, I've no doubt, and she tells me, But from the minute she held me, she absolutely loved and adored me. I have no doubt about that. Now, she told me this when I was 5 or 6, and she told it me as a like, haha, can you believe this? Isn't it funny that I was so ridiculous and thought that it mattered whether I got a girl, and look how much I love you, you know, that's how it was told. And at the time I was just like, oh, that's very funny, Mummy, yes. But this has come up. This has come up a lot. This is called womb trauma. You know, it's crazy how far back this can go, and we're not even, you know, something that I've done very little on is past life trauma, because I just see it as like never ending and kind of egoic. You know, so many people that do that work are like, I was Cleopatra and I got great. You know, and like they've all, you know, they're never the bin man. They're never the fucking peasant that was working in a field. They're always some king or some queen. So I've been quite put off all that work. But I appreciate there's something to it, most likely. But also, like, where do you know, like even in this life, it never ends. You know, you can just keep diving into more and more and more. So it just seems unnecessary for me to, you know, like work with what's tangible, work with what's known, rather than from the ego. However, I'm sure there are some people who have done that work non-egoically and it has benefited them. But from what I see, you know, 99% of it is just nonsense. I think they were my main two childhood traumas, and like I say, it doesn't need to be something big. I mean, I would say the womb one is quite big. I think it's probably affected my sexuality. It's led to a distrust of the feminine, because energetically, you know, as a fetus, you're getting all this, you know. You're a girl, you're a girl, you're a girl, I can't wait for you to be a girl. So immediately there's a distrust there of the feminine. So as that made me gay, and it's definitely shown up in how I feel around women. Like, I don't trust them. I don't. It's hard, you know, because I can feel like my host in the apartment that if you watch English Refugee, you've seen recently, you know, like I can be like, this woman's amazing. And I have had good connections with some women, but yeah, there's definitely just less trust there. And then I think my next trauma was school. Obviously, what I spoke about earlier about being lied to, conditioned, all that. But I actually had a run of really bad teachers, starting in year 3 with Mr. Griffiths. Oh, he hated me. He absolutely hated me. You know, he was the stereotypical projector, you know, who saw, you know, this gifted free child who spoke his mind and just wanted to quell it. and really from year 3, that was my school experience. My first 3 teachers were good in infant school, although I can remember trauma from infant school. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Like, there was one where so at this time, reception year 1 and year 2 were all in the same class when I was in reception. That changed when I went into year 1, I think. So as a reception kid, the teacher was clapping and showing us how to clap along. It was a music lesson, and I thought I was doing just fine. And suddenly, I remember seeing her sort of nodding past me to what I soon realised was an older child. And this older child's hands came over, grabbed my wrist, and started clapping to the beat. I was obviously doing it completely wrong. And the humiliation of that. You know, obviously I forgot about this. I was like 3 years old or 4 years old or something. But then when I came to doing the work and assessing why I was so scared of dancing, why I had such bad rhythm, why I'm just awful on a dance floor, and musically, and why I can't pick up rhythm, you know, when I was doing the regression work, it took me back to that moment, and that just shut down all my musical, you know, I just had so much fear around being exposed as out of time or out of the beat. So, you know, again, another little example of how something can affect you massively later on in life. But yeah, then Mr. Griffiths fucking terrorised me. Mr. Maddox fucking terrorised me. Mr. Richmond was an absolute cunt. And then I went to secondary school, and yeah, I was just too awake for it, you know. I just wasn't interested in being told what was true, you know. All I wanted to do was ask questions and sell things, starting with sweets and then moving on to drugs. So the teachers didn't really like that. I was, you know, by year 11, my attendance was probably about 50%. Did really well in my exams, got into sixth form. My sixth form attendance was 17%, got A's and B's. So the teachers just hated me, you know. I just took the piss out of their crappy little system and was constantly just showing them what twats they are. So the school system was very traumatic for me, but it was also, you know, we learned through our trauma, it was also very empowering, you know, realizing that you don't have to conform to what authority says and it's fine, and you can make things happen. And by the time you're 17, you're earning 50 grand a year selling weed. Like, what are you going to tell me? And then later in life, the main traumas have been losing businesses. Had a really successful business, but then had a big scandal around it. My staff, because I treated them like shit, basically made out that it was a dog abuse centre, and they got some videos that they could twist and make look like dog abuse from them. You know, when you're in a room of 50 dogs, you've got a pack of dogs, of course you use your legs to separate them. Oi, no, what? You know, this is how you stop them fighting. You dominate the pack, but you're not kicking them. But if you take that video and take a still when the foot is being used to lift a dog off that's humping another dog, and then you send it to a Daily Mail and say, oh, it's dog abuse, then it's dog abuse. So that was really traumatic, you know, going from being this Sheffield's dog man, Sheffield's best dog trainer, to Sheffield's dog abuser, and it destroyed the business. You know, I was making $1,000 a day, and suddenly it was 200 a day. It was just a nightmare. And then I built it back up, and then COVID happened. I sold it for 200 grand. COVID happened, and I ended up selling it for 45. And then I started 2 businesses of passion. First one in Hebden Bridge, an amazing spiritual centre. 150 grand went into that. Ended up bailing on it for 10 grand. It was basically going to go bankrupt. We hadn't paid any business rates, and they just hit us with 3 years business rates, and they came and condemned the building because we hadn't done any building regs. It was all in COVID. We were building it in COVID, and we were just like, fuck the system, man. But yeah, it definitely came back to bite. So that was 45 grand to put right. So I was just like, I just passed it on to someone for 10 grand. But that was a passion and a purpose, and it was my life at the time. I had everything invested in spiritually, energetically, intellectually, financially. Everything was in it, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But the idea of letting go of it and losing it was heavily traumatic. So that all happened in about 3 months. And then I was just like, I have to, you know, I was suicidal at this point. I was like, I just have to get out of the country. So I moved to Thailand. And because of that trauma and just the boredom of being an expat, I threw myself into buying a house, which you're not even allowed to do, and creating a business, which you're not really allowed to do. And there are loads of people who do it, but they don't put it on YouTube, and they don't also piss off a load of libtards at the same time. So the libtards ganged up on me out of jealousy because I bought the best house in the village, and because I was speaking truth that they couldn't handle. So obviously, as a libtard does, they tried to cancel the truth rather than take it in. So they took clips out of my YouTube videos and it made me look really bad. And it ended up on Thai national news, so then obviously the authorities acted. So I ended up getting done for working without a work permit, and yeah, put in prison and getting deported. So they're like kind of my adulthood traumas. Of course, there's loads of other ones, you know, broken hearts and all that, but yeah, it's just part of the journey. And it's all just part of the journey. This is it, you know, like all these things happen to take us deeper. You know, if we're here for a deep journey, if we're here dedicated to God, doing God's work, or, you know, that's one way of seeing it. Others will put it as like, if we're here having the internal journey, the spiritual journey, the journey of enlightenment, you know, whatever language you've got around it, if your focus is, let's just say enlightenment, let's just use that word, becoming the most authentic, deepest version of yourself, then all of these traumas are blessings, because they're what allow us to do the work. They're what force us to do the work, you know, when you are traumatized. So for me, you know, like when did it all start for me? Yeah, what really triggered it was a heartbreak. The last time I would say my heart was really broken, I'd been about 30 probably, and I was in a co-addiction, and he was stunning. Like he was, you know, that's all it was, you know, it was all lust. I have no idea where my hotel is. He was stunning, like the ego's dream. You know, so proud to be seen as his partner. Like, I mean, he was just out of his world good looking. Absolutely broke my heart, even though it was the most awful relationship, and it was only like 2 or 3 months. This is love addiction, and that triggered my self-worth journey. So, you know, had it not been for that trauma, which I now look back on and laugh at, you know, it was just the most ridiculous co-addiction. But had it not been for that very traumatic feeling at the time, and incident at the time, You know, I wouldn't have been sparked into my journey. And then like the Thailand thing, you know, I wouldn't have the wisdom I have now. I wouldn't have leaned into myself as much now. That 6 months I spent at my parents' house, you know, it was amazing self-work. I think that's the most powerful 6 months of my life. You know, there's been many powerful moments when I found men's work, when I first drank ayahuasca, when I, you know, first started connecting with my inner child. Like, all along the way there's been like big moments. But that 6 months at my parents' house and really having to face, you know, embarrassment, humiliation, failure, self, I don't think there's ever been a stronger process over a 6 month period than that time. And that was very recently. You know, I'm talking about only that only ended 2 weeks ago when I came to Mexico. And as I said in a video recently, it was on English Refugee, I think that my body is now recalibrating. I'm coming out of fight or flight, or probably more fawn, to be honest. And you know, I'm becoming alive again. I'm feeling my purpose again, all that. But I wouldn't be speaking with this wisdom and this depth. And I'm not saying this is the wisdom or an amazing wisdom. I think there's at least 2 people I know, both on YouTube actually. I'll try and remember to put their channels up here, that speak with a greater wisdom than me. So, you know, I see greater wisdom. I'm not saying I am the wisdom. But whatever wisdom you see in this, if you're not just, you know, one of them, then, you know, it's come from all this trauma. So embrace your trauma, lean into your trauma, feel your emotion that is trapped because of the trauma. You know, it's all there as a teacher. And for those that just project, you know, if you can start to feel your triggers rather than act from your triggers, then this is the start of the process. And I think I said a sentence earlier about trying to objectively accept that your life is a lie without getting emotional about it. This is the start. I have a feeling this is one of the best videos I've ever done. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. I might try and title it something like, "Why am I so crazy?" Obviously that's a bit clickbaity, or let you know the trauma that made me so crazy. But I feel like it might have crazy in it just to, you know, get people to watch it, because I think it's an important message. So yeah, to clarify, I don't think I'm crazy. I think I'm incredibly sane. The crazy projection is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously people like me get that a lot. Oh, he's crazy. But you know, that's the easiest go-to projection, to not have to hear someone who is speaking with a perception that you haven't perceived yet, a reality that you are unable to perceive currently. If I use that in the title, then it'll be like, because people like negativity. It's so sad. If I put like, "Why I'm so enlightened," or you know, the joy of life, no one's going to click on it. So yeah, forgive me for that, and understand that I obviously know I'm not crazy. I think I'm the opposite of crazy. I think I've accepted that society is crazy. And of course this journey is messy. Like, of course, when you let go of all social norms and standards and ideology, and you lean into the fact you know nothing, that is going to be messy. There's going to be what people class as mistakes. Obviously not mistakes, just further teachings. There's going to be humiliations. There's going to be things you get wrong. You know, everyone is so desperate to be right, so they just stay to the status quo that is right. But when you let go of that, when you let go of the opinion of others and needing to be seen by others or impressed by others, then that's when your journey can start. And actually you become way more impressive, you know, because you gain wisdom. And nothing's sexier, nothing's more powerful, nothing's more alluring than wisdom. You know, I know some old guys who are wise, and you know, they can have any girl they want. You know, when the looks go, you better have some wisdom. Please do let me know what you think on this one. I think it feels good, this video. Please comment, please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you for more soon. Gracias.